Hi, my name is Rob Parsons. Well, I can't tell you what a privilege it is for me to speak to you tonight. I've spoken quite a few times on this big top stage, and every message I preached has mattered to me, I promise you that. But I think I can honestly say to you that so far as I know, none has mattered to me as much as what I want to share with you tonight. It's not because it's a great message, it's a very simple message, and I'll be pretty short actually tonight. But this message has burned in my heart. I want to share with you just a couple of verses from the Bible there from Luke 15. The tax gatherers and sinners came to listen to Jesus. The people nobody else wanted to even touch. The outcasts. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the religious people, began to complain. Look, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. And then Jesus told them a story. In fact, Jesus told them a story that has been called the greatest short story ever written. I remember my senior lecturer in English literature, who as far as I know had no particular faith, saying to me, I believe it is the greatest short story ever written. The story of the boy who broke his father's heart. And today we've been looking at mission, and we've been looking at a God of passion. This is a story of passion. And we have thousands of people in the big top tonight, all kinds of people. People who have walked the Christian road for many years, people in whose heart faith is dying. Single people and married people and young and old and single parent mums and dads. Those who've not sure whether they believe in God or not. But the incredible thing is, whoever we are and whatever we believe, God has a passion for us. I think the notes for this year's Spring Harvest are incredible, and there's a wonderful story in them. It is of Vincent Donovan, a Catholic missionary. And he goes to the Maasai tribe and he meets a young man, a young, vibrant leader. A young man who has searched for God as he could know him pretty well all his life. On one occasion he slept on the rim of a live volcano, in the hope somehow he would hear God and God would speak to him. He had been through endless efforts to try to reach God, and Vincent Donovan comes to him and says, you believe that you are searching for God, Ole Sike. Ole Sike, you believe you are searching for God as a hunter chases a lion. But Ole Sike, God is searching for you. Ole Sike, God is the lion. God is the lion. And however you come tonight, God is the lion. You may not believe in God, but God believes in you. And they came to him, the religious ones, and they said, why does he eat with them? The prostitutes, the tax gatherers, the sinners. Why does he eat with those that we religious people don't even want to touch? And Jesus turns to them, and with incredible passion, this young, single man tells them the story of the father's heart that was broken over his child. Tells it with passion, because down through the years he had seen his own father's heart broken time and time again. The story of the prodigals is the story of mission. When I was writing the book that try to encapsulate some of what I'm going to share with you tonight, called Bringing Home the Prodigals, I'm writing it in a little guest house overlooking the Gower Bay in Swansea. And I come down to have a break from writing, and there's an old priest outside. He's got a long beard. He's got what my kids used to call Jesus sandals. Looks like something out of a Harry Potter movie, to be honest. And he asks me what I'm doing, and I tell him, and he tells me an unbelievable story, a wonderful story. He says, near here in a village is an old 3-story house. And the old woman who lives there has a son. He left 25 years ago. She has not seen him since he left. And every night there is a light burning in the top window of that house. It has burned for 25 years. He said, we pass it and the bulb must go out. But we have never seen that house without the light on. It is for her son. The Prodigals. One of the most dramatic pieces of drama I have ever seen in my life was in this big top. They asked the young people to come in. The kids crowded into the big top. In fact, some of the adults had to wait outside. And then somebody read out the statistics of the rate at which young people leave the church. And these kids began to walk out. First 10, then 50, then 100. We almost wanted to run after them and drag them back. In my heart, I could feel a little of the passion that Jesus felt of the Father's heart about the prodigals. It is an incredible message, and I want to share with you tonight just a few thoughts on this whole issue of prodigals. Number one, we have made prodigals of some of our kids, some of our people who never were prodigals at all. I will never forget, I was 19 years old, and I'm in this church, and a friend of mine who is 20 years old, and her fiancé, she becomes pregnant. I never forget it as the church leader took the platform and told us that because of what this young couple had done, they were no longer members of this little church. I remember even then, I was only 19 years old, I remember going to this leader and saying, "You are meant to be the shepherd of the flock. Not as soon as a lamb breaks a leg to kick them out, you are their shepherds." So far as I know, they didn't go to church for 30 years. And the other day, I'm in this church, and I see them come in at the back. 30 years on, he has been faithful to her, and she has been faithful to him. And they have brought this child up together. And it is true they made a mistake. But I doubt they ever were prodigals. They were made prodigals. All the while, God's heart was for them. I spoke just last week to a young woman, early 20s. She said to me, one of the leaders in my church said that godly women don't wear Doc Marten boots. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, we smile, but I'll tell you, it is a tragedy. We have made prodigals of some of our kids because of the color of their hair, or the bit of piercing in their nose or lower lip, because they dressed in black, because they did this or that, because somebody caught them smoking behind the toilets. I'm not saying those are good things, but we have made prodigals of kids for no good reason at all. They just turned their back on some silly rules and regulations that never did matter to God. Heaven never was lying awake at night over some purple hair or some pink hair or a little ironmongery. And there are people in this very tent, and you're only hanging on to faith by an inch because of what people have done to you. They have said to you, if you do this, if you do that, and you must look to God for what you do. Take people's advice. They may be wiser than you, but don't live your life imprisoned by them. A man has 2 sons, and one of them gets kind of offended in his early 20s in church. They don't like the way he dresses. He stops going to church. He moves to London. He works with homeless people. He cares for them. Their pain makes him cry. Once he almost gets arrested trying to defend some guy who's having his bed put on a skip outside John Lewis's. He loves people. The other one stays in church. He becomes a deacon or a member of the PCC. He never misses a meeting. In fact, he never misses anything. He says things like this, "I am saying this to you in love." If anybody ever says that to you, get out of the way fast. Something's going to drop on you from a great height. He says things like, "I care about this church, I care about God's name," but he's hard on the single-parent mum. He's hard on that young guy. He's hard on this and he's hard on that, and he drives the church leader crazy with his biting criticism. Which is the prodigal? Both. And both need to come home. But if you want to know which God has more problem with, it's easy. Jesus told the story. 2 men go up to the temple to pray. And one says, "Heavenly Father, I've done it all. I pray the prayers. I've done it. I've done the whole religious thing." But another one stays as far away from the holy place as he possibly can. He beats his chest. "Lord," he says, "if you knew what I'd done, I can't come near you. Have mercy on me. And heaven stops for a moment as we wonder which one heaven will approve of, and heaven says, that one. It's almost as if there's a local church, and a deacon stands up, or a leader stands up, or a member of the congregation stands up, and they're dressed perfectly, and they do it all, and they never upset the apple cart. And they say, God, thank you for the man or woman I am. And suddenly a prostitute rushes in, and she hides under the communion table, and she says, God, I'm sorry, forgive me. And heaven looks down and says, that one, that's the one that has the heart after me. We have made prodigals of some who never were. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, we must stop judging each other, especially by our children. If you have 3 kids and their bedrooms are tidy and they save their pocket money to buy study guides and they love going to every event at Spring Harvest and they say, why aren't church services longer? Don't think that you are great parents. You just got lucky. I would urge you not to have a 4th. I remember a woman now with 3 kids, and they were perfect kids. And she foolishly began to criticize other people's kids. Anybody who criticizes anybody else's children until their own are in their 90s is crazy. She would say where they're going wrong, and if only you were more disciplined. And then when she was 43 years old, heaven sent her a little bundle. This kid came into the world smoking a cigar. We got to stop judging each other by our children. Do you know what we've got to do? We've got to be more vulnerable with each other. Sometimes people say to me, hey Rob, you executive director of Care for the Family, what's it like? Do you feel under pressure to have the kind of perfect marriage, perfect kids? And I say, sometimes it crosses my mind, but not much. Because you can read all the books, look at all the videos. From the very first day, 15 years ago, we built this on vulnerability. My kids are doing okay at the moment, but I'll tell you, they have scared me to death. I have 2 of the most honest kids I know. I can remember being right there now, on those chairs, 3 years ago. And Lloyd's going through a tough time. He's been very testing. He's 22 years old now. He was on Spring Harvest last week, running, helping the Celebration of Life thing. But he's giving me grief. He's 19 years old. 3 years ago. And they're standing for worship, and they ask people to sit if they want prayer. And lots of people sit, and then after a while, Lloyd sits. I feel a tear run down my face. People gather around him for prayer. And I go out and I say, Lloyd, that was one of the most moving things I've ever experienced. What made you sit? Daddy said, my knees were killing me. You know, we go through a time in our lives as parents where we think, actually, it's going to be fine. If we do this, if we do that, but it's not fine. There are no guarantees, none. No guarantees. And for that reason, we have, if we have prodigals, whether they are kids or brothers or sisters or even mothers and fathers, in a strange reversal of the parable. Or friends, we have to be set free from guilt. Many of you tonight have carried the guilt for your prodigals you have no right to carry. It's not you have been perfect, friends or children or especially parents. You've just been parents. You've given it your very best shot. I think of a church leader now, and he's in a cell with his daughter. He is a fantastic father. His wife has been an incredible mother. And this girl is arrested for burglary, and he puts his arms around her and weeps. And he says, Sally, I am so ashamed of what you've done, but I am not ashamed of you. We will get through this together somehow. I know there's that verse in Proverbs, bring up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old he won't depart from it. It's not a guarantee. It's a general principle. Adam and Eve had the perfect father and the perfect environment, but they went away. Their father didn't want them to go. Most of the Bible is God, the perfect parent, saying, how come you went away from me? R.T. Kendall of Westminster Chapel, great friend of mine, and some years ago the Billy Graham organization asked if they could film R.T. on an hour of his theology. He spoke for almost an hour. They had 5 minutes left at the end of the film. And they say, R.T., just fill the film up. He said, what do you want me to do? He gets kind of grumpy, to be honest. And they said, well, tell us about your family. He said, you don't want to know about my family. I've been a failure as a father. Now, I believe R.T. has been a great father, but he honestly believed that he'd spent too much time at the chapel, too much time getting his doctorate. He gave me permission to tell this and put it in the book. And at that time, you could say his kids were prodigals. He said, I've been a failure as a father. They said, tell us about it. For 5 minutes, Dr. R.T. Kendall, Westminster Chapel, talks about the fact he's a failure as a father. The only bit of the film they ever used, and they showed it all over the world to hundreds of thousands of church leaders, was that last 5 minutes. And as they showed it, men and women, parents and friends and kids who had prodigals breathed a sigh of relief and said, me too. Never forget hearing Billy Graham on the Larry King show. I think he was talking about Franklin, who is now taking his place in the ministry. And Franklin was a prodigal in his early 30s, drinking and gambling and womanizing, and Billy said, Ruth and I lived on the top of a hill. And it'd be 1 o'clock in the morning, he'd still be not home. And then we'd hear the car shrieking around the bends as it came up the mountain. And finally into the drive. And we'd know for one more night at least, he was safe. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no pain like parental pain. There is no pain like parental pain. But some of you have carried a guilt far too long. It's not you have been perfect parents. You gave it your best shot. You did what you could. But the time comes when our children make choices. And sometimes those choices are bad choices. And because we've spent all our lives protecting them, because we've spent all our lives keeping them from harm, it breaks our heart to see what is happening to them. But sometimes we can't do anything. We just have to wait and hope. And as that young carpenter, that young single man, so incredibly encapsulated in his parable, sometimes we wait and we look down the long road. We wait. A woman wrote to me shortly after the book came out, and she said, Rob, my 18-year-old daughter left. I didn't see her for 4 years. And she said, every night as I went to bed, I would put the lights out, but I couldn't bear to leave the house dark. I would always leave a porch light on. And at Christmas, I would put a little Christmas tree outside our house. And she said, when my daughter did come home, and she has come home wonderfully now, she said, Mom, I was so ashamed of what I'd done. I couldn't bear to knock the door, but I would drive into our street in the early hours of the morning. And every house would be dark except our house. And the light would be on in the porch. And at Christmas, I would sometimes in the early morning sit outside our house and I would look at the little Christmas tree and my mind would go back of all the Christmases when I was a child. Lay down the guilt. You've carried it too long. And always leave a light on. And ladies and gentlemen, it's more than that. This is not just about prodigals. This is about the kind of local churches we have. I heard an old man prophesy years ago, when the Father's house is filled with the Father's love, the prodigals will come home. That incredible picture of millions of prodigals streaming in from every corner of the earth. When the Father's house is filled with the Father's love, the prodigals will come home. Now this is very serious. If we don't stop fighting each other in local church, there's hardly any point bringing them back. If we don't stop arguing over styles of worship, or buildings, or the youth work, or the flower arranging, or the leadership, there's hardly any point bringing them back. We have churches fighting and splitting again. You and I do not have the right to a church that suits us in every respect. We don't have the right to worship that's always as we want it, to messages that are either deep or shallow, depending how we feel. We don't have the right to the youth leaders being perfect or the building committee doing exactly what we want. We don't have the right to strut and stamp and kick at annual general church meetings. We don't have the right to drive church leaders crazy with criticism. You can have a church that suits you in every respect if you fight for it, but your prodigals won't come home. We must have places of forgiveness and grace. Hey, within 24 hours of praying that he was dead and buried, he could have asked for anything. But the young carpenter looks up to heaven and says, Father, give me this. I pray they may be one, that the world may believe that you sent me. It goes to the very heart of mission. Gracious places, forgiving places, not perfect places to which the prodigals can come back. And you know, when they do come back, they will still be smelling of the pigsty. Pray with all your heart when they do come back. They meet the father before they meet the elder brother. The elder brother will say, can I still smell alcohol in your breath? You still smoking? You still with that woman? You still there? But the father will put his arms around them and hold them tight. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe in evangelism. I spend most of my life in it in one form or another, but I can tell you this. As great as the call to evangelism is the call to God to bring home the prodigals. And we must be ready to greet them as they come down the road broken and dirty and scarred and bleeding and smelling of the pigsty. And they have to see the light from far off and want to come home. Who wants to come home to a home that's always fighting and kicking? We have to have homes of love and acceptance and grace. And we have to believe again in the power of prayer. This whole thing for me was born out of something 5 years ago. I was asked to speak at a day of prayer at the NEC called Bringing Home the Prodigals. Thousands of people, I got a message in my pocket, and I'm sat on the stage, and the organizers erected a huge cross, and during the day, people were asked to lay the names of their prodigals at the foot of the cross. Graham Kendrick's going to lead worship. In fact, Spring Harvest have wonderfully joined with us in an initiative over the next 2 years to replicate that experience. We're going all over the country. Graham Kendrick's going to be with us and other worship leaders from Spring Harvest as we try to call the nation to prayer for the prodigals. Gerard told you, you get some information out on the way out. We're trying to call the nation to prayer, and I'm there on the platform, and they've got the cross erected, and thousands of people are bringing the names of their prodigals, laying them at the foot of the cross. Are they saying, if I lay that name there, God guarantees to bring my prodigal home? No, they're not. They are throwing themselves on God. Those who love prodigals have a great advantage in prayer. They tend to be humble men and women. They know no book or seminar is going to sort them out. They are totally thrown on God. And they came in prayer in their thousands and laid the names at the foot of the cross. And after an hour, they asked me to leave the platform and come and stand at the foot of the cross to pray with people. So I get up to do my duty, if you like. And I've got a message in my pocket, and I know what I'm going to say, and it's all sorted out. And the second I see these names, I begin to cry. Just then, my own kids are giving me a bit of a hard time. I feel very vulnerable as a father. I cry like a baby. Thousands of names there. What story lay behind the little line that said, bring Jack home? What pain behind the single word that just said, Susan? People cried, I cried with them. And when I stood up that day, I felt God gave me a message that I'm sharing with you tonight, and it is burning in my heart. We need to pray for our prodigals. We need to be vulnerable in our churches and say to others, me too. I have a prodigal. Could we pray together? Cities beginning to pray. Churches gathering together to pray as we say, God, in your mercy, bring home the prodigals. We have made prodigals of some who never were. It is time to stop judging. It is time to start forgiving. My lifelong gratitude is to those who have been there for my kids. And my greatest hurt has been at the hands of those who have not been there for them, sometimes even given them a hard time when they should have been supported. Sometimes come to me at my lowest moments and enjoyed almost moments of worry and of fear. I must forgive them, and you must forgive them as well. Sometimes you will have to even forgive your prodigal, because although you love them, they have broken your heart. And finally, when you forgive others and you forgive your prodigals, that may allow you to do the hardest thing of all, to forgive yourself. And then an incredible thing happens. We suddenly look down the road and we see the face coming towards us, the tear-stained face. And suddenly we see it is our face. We are the prodigal. All along it was the Father reaching out to us. Whenever I tell this story, that opening of Philip Yancey's book comes to me. Do you know how he begins his book, What's So Amazing About Grace? He talks about a woman who I think she was a prostitute, and she had sold her daughter into prostitution to pay for her drug habit. And somebody says to her, have you ever gone to a church for help? And a look of utter amazement crosses her face. And she says, why would I do that? They would only make me feel worse. And then Yancey tells that incredible story of the modern prodigal daughter, in fact. She's 15 years old. She has a row with her father over the color of her hair or the length of her skirt. She stalks out one night and goes to the place she knows he'll never find her. Leaves little Traverse City, goes to Detroit City. The second she gets off the Greyhound bus, there's a man in a big car waiting to welcome her. He puts her in the penthouse of a fancy hotel. Men pay big money for this young girl. For 2 years, she lives like a model. Her every wish, all the things she dreamt of, everything she left behind in little Traverse City. And then the drugs get to her, and she becomes ill. He takes her out of the hotel, and she's in a shop doorway. Still sleeping with a couple of men at night just to keep the habit going, and she's got a blanket around her, a newspaper underneath her, and a hacking cough. And one night as she sits there, her mind goes to home. And she remembers a brown Labrador dog bouncing through the garden, an apple blossom in the spring. And she thinks, I want to go home. And she rings her folks and gets an answer phone, and she says, Mom, Dad, I'm coming home. My bus gets into Traverse City at midnight. If you're not there, I'll understand. I don't deserve to come home. If nobody is there to meet me, I'll get back on it, stay on the bus all the way to Canada. It's a long way from Detroit City to Traverse City. And it gets dark as she goes through the night. She falls asleep. It starts to snow. And then suddenly there's a hiss of brakes, and she hears the driver saying, Traverse City, folks, just 15 minutes here. And she thinks, 15 minutes to decide my life. She tries to lick the lipstick off her teeth, to get the nicotine off her fingers. She straightens her blouse. And she makes her way into the bus station, wondering if there'll be anybody to meet her. Nothing she ever imagined got her ready for the sight she saw that night. 30, 40 people, friends and relatives and uncles and aunties and a grandmother and a great-grandmother. And they got party hats on. And there's a big banner there, welcome home, darling. And there's her mother, and here's her father coming towards her with tears rushing down his face. Daddy, she says, I am so sorry. Hush, child. We don't have time for that. we're going to be late for the party. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't give you any guarantees, none. All I can tell you is I believe with all my heart the time has come. The time has come. Lay down the guilt. Be a little easier on each other in your local church. Be more forgiving. Be more accepting. Ask God to reveal to us what really matters to Him. This burns in my heart, not just for those who have prodigals. I wrote this book for people who have young children, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, before they are prodigals. Begin to believe what we can do to protect some of our kids. Begin to pray as you've never prayed before. God is going to bring home millions of our prodigals from every corner of the earth. Don't ever give up. Don't lose heart. Bring them to Him in prayer. And always leave a light on. God bless you.